After a warehouse accident shattered my leg, the hospital told me I needed $3,200 for emergency surgery. I swallowed my pride and called my son. In the background, I heard champagne glasses clinking as he laughed. We just closed a $22 million real estate deal. A man who lost 3 farms shouldn't expect us to save him over $3,200. My wife grabbed the phone and sneered, "Go ask your precious daughter." Less than an hour later, my daughter rushed into my hospital room, placed an envelope on my bed, and whispered, "Dad, I sold my car." Weeks later, my son came pounding on my door, but by then, everything had changed. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories, and thank you for being here today. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country, I want to know who's with me. Quick note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and meaningful reflection. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lesson it carries is worth every minute. The Silverado smelled like cardboard and machine oil the way it always did after a long shift. I sat in the parking lot of the warehouse off Highway 36 for longer than I should have, engine off, hands still wrapped around the steering wheel like I needed something solid to hold on to. The dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. I had been sitting there for 11 minutes. I looked up at the rearview mirror. The man looking back at me had deep lines cut into his forehead that hadn't been there 10 years ago. Gray stubble that I kept meaning to shave but never got around to. Eyes that had gone from sharp and restless to something quieter. Something that looked a lot like a man who had stopped expecting surprises. When did I become this? I said it out loud right there in that empty parking lot to nobody but the man in the mirror. And then I answered myself, I know exactly when. I drove home in the dark, windows down, because the AC on the Silverado had given out 2 summers ago, and I hadn't found the money to fix it yet. The hot July air of Texas pressed in from all sides, thick and heavy, smelling like cut grass, and something burning far off in the distance. I let my mind go back the way it always did on the long drives home. Back to the version of myself I used to be. 12 years ago, I was a different man entirely. My name is George Whitmore, and 12 years ago, I owned 3 working farms in a stretch of rich agricultural land outside of Fort Bend County, Texas. 420 acres total, spread across 3 separate properties that I had spent the better part of 20 years building from the ground up. The first farm ran cattle. Black Angus, mostly a solid herd of 230 head that I knew by sight better than most men know their own neighbors. The second farm grew corn and soybeans, rotating the fields every season the way my father had taught me, the way his father had taught him. The third supplied hay and livestock feed to smaller operations throughout the county. Families that depended on that feed. Families that depended on me. I was not a rich man. I never mistook myself for one. But I was a man who had built something real, something that fed people and employed people and put down roots in the Texas soil the way my grandfather always said a man should. On Sunday mornings, Caroline used to stand next to me in the 3rd pew of First Baptist Church in Richmond and whisper to the women beside her loud enough that I could hear every word, "That's my husband. He runs 3 farms. Started with nothing but a pickup truck and 40 acres. She said it with a pride that made my chest swell every single time. Richard. Our son was 22 then, just finishing his business administration degree at the University of Houston. He used to call me on Sunday evenings, and the conversations would stretch for an hour easy. He'd ask about the cattle prices, about the soybean yields, about what I thought about the commodity markets. He told me once in the parking lot after his junior year homecoming game that he planned to come back after graduation. Help me expand. Dad, we could turn this into something regional. he said, gripping my shoulder with both hands, his eyes bright with the kind of confidence that only 22-year-olds carry without any weight behind it. 3 farms could become 30. I laughed and told him not to get ahead of himself. But I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. Melissa was 16 that last good summer. She was the quiet one, always had been. While Richard talked about expansion and commodity futures, Melissa would pull on her old work boots every Saturday morning without being asked, and follow me out to check the fence lines along the north pasture. She never complained about the heat. She never asked to go to the mall. Instead, the way her friends did, she would hand water bottles to the farmhands without being told. And when one of the older workers, a man named Earl, who had bad knees and moved slow, struggled with a feed bag, Melissa would already be there lifting the other end before Earl even had to ask. She's going to be the one who carries this family, my mother told me once, watching Melissa drag a hay bale across the barn floor. I laughed at that too. I thought I knew better. The summer evenings back then were the kind that make a man feel like the world is exactly the right size. I would sit on the back porch after dinner, boots off iced tea, sweating on the rail, listening to the cattle low in the far pasture, and the cicadas going full volume in the pecan trees along the fence line. Caroline would sit beside me sometimes, her hand finding mine in the dark. We did not always have a lot to say. But there was a warmth between us then that felt permanent, the way the land felt permanent, the way the farms felt permanent. I thought it would always be this way. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about so many things that sometimes I wonder how a man who could read weather patterns and soil conditions and cattle weights got so completely blind to the things happening right inside his own house. But that summer, that last good summer, I did not know what was coming. I sat on my porch with my iced tea and my land stretching out in every direction and my family inside the lit-up kitchen behind me, and I thought I had built something that could not be taken away. I found out I was wrong on a Tuesday morning in October 12 years ago before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. I remember the sound first. A low rumble coming up the gravel drive, more than one vehicle, moving slow and steady, the way vehicles move when they are absolutely certain of where they are going and do not need to hurry. I stepped out onto the porch, still holding my coffee mug, and I saw them coming through the morning mist, 3 black SUVs with government plates moving in a line, kicking up a thin trail of pale dust behind them. My stomach dropped straight through the porch floor. I set my coffee down on the rail. My hand was shaking so badly that the mug rattled against the wood, and some of the coffee sloshed over the rim and ran down between the boards. I gripped the railing with both hands and watched those 3 black vehicles roll to a stop in front of my gate, and I felt something cold and heavy settle into my chest, something that would not fully leave for the next 12 years. The lead vehicle's door opened. A woman in a dark jacket stepped out, badge already in her hand, walking toward me with the kind of calm, measured stride that told me she had done this before, many times before. "Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was even professional. No warmth, no apology. "I'm Special Agent Karen Mills with the USDA Office of Inspector General. We have a federal warrant to inspect and temporarily secure your property." I opened my mouth, closed it. My throat had gone completely dry, the way it does right before a man gets news that is going to change everything. "What is this about?" I finally managed my voice, coming out rougher than I intended, scraping against something tight in my chest. Agent Mills looked at me the way people look at you when they have already made up their mind about who you are and are just waiting for you to catch up. "Sir," she said, "we need to ask you to step aside." Agent Mills did not wait for me to answer. She turned back toward the SUVs and made a small, precise gesture with 2 fingers, the kind of gesture that people make when they have rehearsed this moment many times and no longer need to think about it. The doors of all three vehicles opened at once, and a dozen men and women in dark jackets stepped out onto my gravel drive, some carrying document boxes, some carrying equipment. I did not recognize all of them moving with the same quiet, purposeful efficiency of people who had a job to do and intended to do it thoroughly. My legs carried me down the porch steps without me consciously deciding to move. "Wait," I said, and my voice came out louder than I intended, rough and cracking at the edges. "Hold on just a minute. What exactly are you people looking for? This is my property. I have rights here." Agent Mills turned back to face me. Her expression did not change. Not a flicker of irritation, not a trace of sympathy. Just that same measured, professional steadiness that I was already starting to hate. "Mr. Whitmore, a company called Agri-Supply Solutions has been under federal investigation for the past 8 months for fraudulent manipulation of USDA farm subsidy claims." She spoke slowly and clearly, the way people speak to someone they expect might panic. "During the course of that investigation, documents were recovered bearing your name and your signature authorizing the receipt of federal agricultural subsidy payments totaling approximately $1.4 million over a 6-year period. The ground felt like it shifted under my boots. "That's not possible," I said, and I heard the desperation cracking through my own words, bright and ugly. "I never signed anything like that. I never received any payments like that. Whatever documents you have, those signatures are not mine. That will be determined in the course of the investigation, sir." Mills nodded toward the warrant in her hand. "In the meantime, under federal authority, we are securing all financial records, computers and business documents on this property. Your 3 farm operations will be placed under an asset control order. You will not be permitted to sell transfer mortgage or significantly alter any of the secured properties until the investigation is resolved." I felt my stomach heave. I pressed my hand flat against the porch railing to keep myself upright, my knuckles going white against the old painted wood. "How long," I managed, "how long does something like this take?" For the first time, something moved behind Agent Mills's eyes. Not quite sympathy, more like the faint, tired acknowledgement of a woman who had delivered this particular kind of news before and knew there was no good answer to that question. "These investigations are complex, Mr. Whitmore, especially when multiple businesses and multiple states are involved." She paused. "Cooperate fully with the process and let it run its course. That's my advice to you." Then she walked past me toward my office, and her team followed, and there was nothing I could do but stand there on my own porch steps with my hands shaking and watch them carry my life out in cardboard boxes. They were there for 6 hours. They took every computer, every filing cabinet, every paper record going back 11 years. They photographed the equipment, cataloged the livestock, documented the inventory in every barn and storage unit on all 3 properties. By the time the last black SUV rolled back down my gravel drive that afternoon, my farmhands were standing in a loose cluster near the cattle gate, caps in their hands, looking at me with the kind of careful, quiet faces that men put on when they do not know what to say. I did not know what to say either, so I told them to go home and that I would call them when I knew more. I never made that call. There was nothing to call about. Within 48 hours, my bank in Richmond had placed a hold on my business lines of credit. The loan officer, a man named Gerald, who had shaken my hand at the county fair not 3 weeks earlier, left me a voicemail so stiff and formal it might as well have been read off a legal document. "Mr. Whitmore, given the current federal action against your properties, we are unable to extend further credit at this time. Please contact our commercial lending department to discuss your options. My options. I almost laughed out loud at that one. The suppliers came next. Hendricks Feed and Supply canceled their contract by email. Morrison Veterinary Services sent a letter. 3 other vendors followed within the week, each one citing uncertainty regarding the legal status of your operations, in language that all sounded like it had been written by the same nervous attorney. I could not blame them. I would have done the same thing in their position. But that did not make it any easier to stand in my barn with a stack of cancellation notices in my hand and realize that a business I had built over 2 decades was coming apart in a matter of days. I sold the cattle first because I had no choice. Without feed contracts and with the operating accounts frozen, I could not afford to keep them. I called every cattle buyer in Fort Bend and Wharton County, and I took the best price I could get, which was not a good price at all because buyers can smell desperation, the way cattle can smell rain, and they priced accordingly. I watched my herd load onto trucks over 3 separate mornings, and each time the last animal disappeared up the ramp, something in my chest felt like it tore loose and did not reattach. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that the investigation would move quickly, that the truth would come out, that a man who had never taken a dollar he had not earned would be cleared without much delay. I told myself that for a very long time. 1 year passed. The investigation expanded. More businesses, more states, more documents. 2 years passed. My attorney filed motions. The government filed responses. 3 years passed. I stopped counting after that because counting made my chest hurt, in a way I could not afford to feel and still get out of bed in the morning. The farm sat. The land sat. I paid the property taxes every year because I had to, because letting them lapse would have meant losing the land entirely, and losing the land felt like losing the last piece of evidence that I had once been something. I sold the equipment to cover the taxes. I sold the second truck. I sold the tractor that my father had helped me buy at an auction in Brenham the year before he died. And one gray morning in February, I drove myself to the distribution warehouse off Highway 36, walked into the HR office, and filled out a job application. The woman behind the desk looked at my paperwork, looked up at me, and then looked back down at the paperwork with the careful neutrality of someone being paid not to ask questions. Previous experience, she asked. Farm operations management, I said. 20+ years. She typed something into her computer. We have an opening for forklift operator on the morning shift. 6 days a week. Benefits after 90 days. I looked at the water-stained ceiling tiles above her desk. I thought about my father's voice telling me that a man works with what he has not, with what he wishes he had. I thought about Caroline at home waiting for me to come back with a solution. I thought about the cattle trucks and the canceled contracts and the federal seal on my office door. I'll take it, I said. She slid the paperwork across the desk toward me, and I picked up the pen, and my hand was steady this time. Not because I was not afraid, but because I had already lost everything I was afraid of losing, and there is a strange, terrible freedom in that. The uniform was polyester, the kind that doesn't breathe in Texas heat, and it had somebody else's sweat worked into the fabric no matter how many times it went through the wash. My name tag read George in thick black letters, and the first morning I pinned it to my chest. I stood in the employee locker room of that distribution warehouse and stared at it for a long moment, my fingers pressed flat against the plastic, like I was trying to decide if the name still fit. It fit. It just didn't feel like mine anymore. The morning shift started at 5:30. I drove in while the sky was still the deep bruised purple of pre-dawn, parked the Silverado in the far corner of the lot, the way new employees do when they haven't yet earned the right to feel comfortable anywhere, and walked through the loading bay doors into a world that smelled like cardboard dust and diesel exhaust, and the particular sharp cold of industrial air conditioning running full blast in the middle of a Texas summer. The forklift they assigned me was a Yale model, older, with a steering column that pulled left and a horn that honked twice every time you powered it up, whether you wanted it to or not. The floor supervisor who ran me through orientation was a heavy-set man with a graying mustache and forearms that looked like they'd been carved from mesquite wood. He introduced himself by sticking out one of those forearms and gripping my hand like he was testing whether I was real. "Dale Hutchins," he said. "I run the morning floor. You got questions, you come to me. You got problems, you come to me. You think you know better than the safety protocols, you come to me, so I can personally watch you clean out your locker." He said it without any meanness behind it, just the flat, certain delivery of a man who had said those words many times and meant every one of them. Then he looked at my paperwork, and something shifted slightly in his expression. "Says here you ran farm operations, 3 properties." "That's right," I said. Dale nodded slowly, the way men nod when they have decided something, but aren't going to say what. "Well," he said, "a forklift isn't that different from a tractor if you think about it right. You'll be fine." And then he walked me to my machine, and that was the end of it. No questions about the farms. No questions about why a man who had run 400 acres was now asking to move pallets of livestock, feed around a warehouse. Just a firm handshake and a broken forklift, and the implicit understanding that whatever had brought me here was my business and nobody else's. In 12 years of working that warehouse floor, Dale Hutchins never once asked me what happened to my farms. I cannot tell you what that meant to me. I'm not sure I have the words for it even now. The work itself was not hard, not for a man who had spent 20 years hauling feed and repairing fence lines and pulling calves in the middle of January nights. My body knew how to work. My hands knew how to grip. What I was not prepared for was the smell of myself when I came home. Cardboard and machine oil and the industrial soap from the warehouse bathroom, all of it worked deep into my skin and my clothes and the fabric of the Silverado's seats. I would walk in through the back door, and I could feel Caroline register it before she even looked up. The first time she pressed her lips together and said nothing. The second time she moved her coffee cup to the far end of the kitchen counter, away from where I'd set my keys. By the third week, she had established a routine that she never formally announced, but that made itself perfectly clear. My work boots went on the mat outside the back door, not inside. My work clothes went directly into the laundry room, not draped over the chair in the bedroom, the way I'd done for 20 years. And I was not to sit on the living room sofa until I had showered. "You smell like the warehouse," she told me one evening, her voice carrying that particular flatness that is somehow worse than anger. "The whole house smells like it when you come in." "I'll shower," I said. "You tracked something in on your boots again." She pointed at the kitchen floor without looking at me. "Can you clean that up before you do anything else?" I cleaned it up. I showered. I sat at the kitchen table in clean clothes and ate the dinner she had left covered in plastic wrap on the counter, and because she had already eaten, she said, and wasn't hungry anymore. There were evenings I would catch her on the phone, her voice going softer and lighter in the other room, laughing at something the way she used to laugh with me when we were first married. And then she would come back into the kitchen, and the laugh would be gone, replaced by that careful, managed neutrality she had started wearing around me like a second skin. I told myself it was the stress. I told myself it was the money. I told myself a lot of things in those years that I no longer believe were true. Melissa was different. Melissa, who was 17 by then, would be at the kitchen table when I came home on the nights she stayed over, textbooks spread out, half a pot of coffee still warm on the counter. She never once commented on how I smelled. She would just look up and say, "Hey, Dad, you want coffee?" And she would pour it without waiting for an answer, because she already knew I wanted it, the way she knew most things about me that I hadn't thought to say out loud. One night I sat down across from her and said, "How was school?" And she closed her textbook and looked at me with those calm, steady eyes that had always reminded me of my mother's and said, "How was your day, Dad? And don't say fine. Tell me for real." So I told her. I told her about the Yale forklift that pulled left, and the inventory system that kept logging errors, and the new kid on the afternoon shift who had nearly taken out a support column with a pallet of water softener salt. And Melissa laughed, and the sound of it in that kitchen was the best thing I had heard all day by a considerable distance. She never asked about the farms. She never asked about the investigation. She never asked about the money or the loans or what was going to happen to us. She just showed up Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings with groceries she bought on her own salary from the part-time job at the school library, and she sat with me and she treated me like I was still worth sitting with. Richard called less and less. When he did call, the conversations had the efficient, slightly distracted quality of a man clearing items off a to-do list. He'd been hired by a real estate firm in Houston, he told me. Commercial properties, big market. He was doing well. The calls got shorter. The gaps between them got longer. And one Sunday evening when I dialed his number and it rang 7 times before going to voicemail, I sat listening to his recorded voice and realized that the son who had gripped my shoulder in that homecoming parking lot and talked about turning 3 farms into 30 had already decided that his future did not have much room in it for a father who drove a forklift. I left a message anyway. I said I hoped he was doing well. He called back 4 days later, said he'd been busy, asked if everything was okay. I said it was fine. Neither one of us believed it. The years have a way of moving differently when you are carrying something heavy. The light ones, the good ones, they slip past before you can catch them. But the hard years, the years when you are waking up at 4:45 to drive to a warehouse job in the dark, when you are watching a woman you have offsham for 3 decades, eat dinner alone on the other side of a wall because she cannot stand to be in the same room as the smell of you, those years drag. They leave marks. They carve lines into a man's face and settle into his joints and change the way he holds himself when he walks into a room. By the time Richard had been in Houston for 3 years, I had stopped expecting his calls on Sunday evenings. He was doing well. He told me so himself on the increasingly rare occasions when he did call, his voice carrying the particular bright energy of a man who has decided that his current life is the only one that matters and that anything before it was simply prologue. Commercial real estate, he said. Big market. The kind of deals that made the numbers in my old farm ledgers look like pocket change. He had a good apartment in the Galleria area, a car lease he was proud of, colleagues he referred to as his network, like the word tasted good in his mouth. "You should see this city, Dad," he told me once, and I could hear the hum of a restaurant behind him, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loud. "Everything's moving here. Every single week there's something new going up. You'd have loved it back in the day." Back in the day. Like the farms were ancient history. Like everything I had built and lost was just the backstory of someone else's more interesting narrative. "I'm glad you're doing well, Richard," I said. "Yeah." A pause, the kind that happens when someone is checking their phone while talking to you. "How's the job?" "It's work," I said. "Right. Yeah." Another pause. "Hey, Dad, I've got a dinner thing in like 10 minutes. Can I call you this weekend?" He did not call that weekend. He called 11 days later, and when I answered, I could tell from the first syllable that he had already half forgotten why he was calling and was operating on some combination of obligation and muscle memory. I talked for 4 minutes. He talked for 2. We said goodbye like men who have run out of things to say but have not yet admitted it to themselves. The conversation I remember most clearly happened on a Tuesday afternoon, about 6 years into my time at the warehouse. I had called him, which I still did, occasionally still holding on to some stubborn belief that the boy who had gripped my shoulder in that parking lot was still in there somewhere underneath the network and the Galleria apartment. He picked up on the third ring, which felt like a small victory. Dad, not a question. A fact. Hey, son, I wanted to check in. The attorneys filed another motion last week on the farm case. I thought maybe… Dad. His voice shifted, the brightness dropping out of it, replaced by something flatter and more impatient. I really wish you wouldn't lead with the farm stuff every time we talk. My jaw tightened. I kept my voice even. I just thought you'd want to know where things stood. I know where things stand, Richard said, and the edge in his voice was sharp enough that I actually pulled the phone slightly away from my ear. Things stand where they've stood for 6 years. Nothing changes. It's always the same story. Another motion, another delay, another reason why it's going to be fine eventually. He exhaled hard through his nose. Can I be honest with you for a second? You're my son, I said. You don't have to ask permission. People only get investigated when they've done something that looks suspicious, he said. I'm not saying you're guilty. I'm saying that's how these things work. And I'm saying that if you had been running things tighter, documenting everything more carefully, this never would have happened in the first place. The words hit me somewhere in the center of my chest, blunt and cold like a fist wrapped in a wet towel. Richard, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, scraping against the tightness in my throat. Those signatures were forged. Someone used my name. I did not take that money. I know that's what you believe, Dad. That's what you believe. Not that's what happened. Not I know, Dad, I'm sorry. That's what you believe, delivered in the tone of a man humoring someone he has already quietly given up on. My hand was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles had gone white. I loosened my grip one finger at a time, the way you do when you are trying very hard not to say the thing you actually want to say. Okay, I said finally. I hear you. I've got to jump on a call, Richard said. The brightness was already coming back into his voice, the restaurant hum replacing the flat impatience, like he'd already moved on before we'd even hung up. Talk soon, Dad. The line went quiet. I sat in the Silverado in my own driveway for a while, after that engine off, hands loose in my lap, staring at the garage door. There was a crack running diagonally across the bottom panel that I had been meaning to fix for 3 months and kept not getting to. I stared at that crack for a long time. Melissa came by the following Saturday morning the way she always did. She was 23 by then, working as an accountant for the school district in Katy, driving a Civic with a cracked dashboard she'd bought with her own money and maintained with a fierce, quiet pride. She brought a casserole dish covered in foil chicken and rice with extra black pepper, the way I liked it, and set it on the counter and hugged me around the shoulders, the way she'd been doing since she was about 9 years old. You look tired, Dad, she said, studying my face with those calm, steady eyes. I'm fine, baby. You say that a lot. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. Richard called me last week. Something shifted in my chest. What did he say? He said you'd been calling a lot. She paused, her jaw tightening in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of myself. I told him that's what sons are supposed to do when their fathers call. Answer the phone. I almost smiled. I felt the corner of my mouth pull before I caught it. Don't start trouble with your brother, Melissa. I'm not starting trouble, she said evenly. I'm stating a fact. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, warm and solid and certain, the way her grip had always been. They're going to figure out those signatures were fake, Dad. I know they are. And when they do, I want you to remember that you didn't do anything wrong, not one thing. I turned my hand over and squeezed hers back, and did not say anything for a moment, because my throat had gone tight, and I did not fully trust my voice. It was 3 weeks after that conversation that I came home from an early shift on a Wednesday afternoon and found a car parked in front of my house that I had never seen before. A white Mercedes late model, clean enough to still have the glossy sheen of a recent detail. It was gone by the time I pulled into the driveway, just the faint indentation of fresh tire tracks in the dirt at the edge of the road. Caroline was in the kitchen when I came in. She was on her phone, her back half turned, and she ended the call quickly when she heard the door, the motion just a half second too fast, too smooth, the way a motion gets when someone has practiced it. "Whose car was that out front?" I asked. She turned around, and her expression was perfectly arranged. Calm. Open. A face that had prepared itself on the short walk from the phone call to the kitchen counter. "Just someone from the neighborhood association," she said, "dropping off some paperwork about the street resurfacing project." "I didn't know we had a neighborhood association," I said. "It's new." She turned back to the counter and started rinsing a glass that was already clean. "You hungry? There's leftover soup in the fridge." I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the back of her head and felt something cold and quiet settle into my stomach. Not rage, not even grief exactly. Just a slow, awful recognition, the kind that a man feels when he has already known something for a long time, but has been working very hard not to put words to it. Some things, once you know them, you cannot unknow. And I was not ready for that. Not yet. So I said, "Soup sounds fine," and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I let myself believe for one more night that the white Mercedes and the quickly ended phone call and the glass that didn't need rinsing were exactly what she said they were. I was not ready, but I was running out of time. Richard showed up on a Friday evening without calling ahead. I heard his car in the driveway, a leased Audi Silver, the kind of car that announces itself, and when I opened the front door, he was already halfway up the porch steps with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm and an expression on his face that I recognized immediately. It was the expression of a man who has already decided what is going to happen and is simply showing up to administer it. Caroline appeared in the hallway behind me. She had known he was coming. I could tell by the way she wasn't surprised. "Dad." Richard gripped my hand briefly, the way you greet someone you are about to negotiate with. "We need to sit down and talk about something important." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten 1,000 dinners, signed 1,000 invoices, built everything I had built. Richard opened the portfolio and laid out a document that ran to 11 pages, and he began to explain it in the careful, measured tone of a man who has rehearsed this presentation and is committed to delivering it cleanly. The document was a marital property partition agreement. Under Texas family code, he explained a husband and wife could legally convert community property into separate property through a written notarized agreement. What he was proposing was straightforward, he said. Caroline would take the family home and her retirement accounts as her sole separate property. I would take the 3 farms and all associated liabilities as my sole separate property. Each party would waive all present and future claims to the other's assets. The federal investigation could drag on for years, Richard said, folding his hands on the table with the practiced calm of someone who bills by the hour. If the government decides to move against the property, Mom could lose the house. This protects her. I looked at the document. Then I looked at Caroline, who was sitting with her arms crossed and her chin set in the way she did when a decision had already been made and my input was a formality. "What if the land gets cleared someday?" I asked. "What if the investigation ends and those farms turn out to be worth something again?" Richard's mouth pulled into something that was almost a smile but landed closer to pity. "Dad, those farms have been frozen for years. They're carrying back taxes, legal fees, and zero income. They're not an asset. They're a liability with dirt on top." He tapped the document. "This protects Mom from your situation." That's all this is. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. Your situation, like the fraud, the forged signatures, the federal investigation, were personal failures of character rather than things that had been done to me by someone else. Caroline leaned forward. George, if you have any responsibility left for this family, you'll sign it. I am not going to lose this house because of what happened to those farms. What happened to those farms? Not what someone did to us. What happened? Like weather. Like something nobody caused. I read the document twice. The operative language sat at the center of page 4. Each party hereby waives any and all present or future claims to the other's separate property, including any proceeds, appreciation or value realized therefrom, regardless of cause. Regardless of cause. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake, which surprised me. I signed my name on the line, and Richard signed as witness, and Carolyn signed beside him, and the notary. Richard had brought a small, efficient man who said nothing and left immediately after stamping the pages, sealed it all into something that could not be undone. That night my phone rang at 9:40. Samuel Porter. He had been my attorney since the early days of the farms, a quiet, careful man who had reviewed more of my contracts than I could count. George, he said, and something in his voice made me sit up straighter. I heard about the partition agreement. I need to ask you directly, did you read all of it, including the addendum pages? I read the main document, I said, a pause, the kind that carries weight. There's an addendum on the final page, George. Language giving Richard advisory rights over any future decisions regarding the disposition of the farm properties. I don't believe you initialed it separately, which means it may not meet the requirements under Texas Family Code, Section 4.104. He paused again. I want you to think carefully about whether you knew that clause was in there. I hadn't known. I told him so. Keep your copy somewhere safe, Samuel said quietly. And George, that regardless of cause language is broader than you may realize. I just want you to understand what you signed. I thanked him and hung up and sat at the kitchen table alone, the house quiet around me, the signed document still on the counter where Richard had left it. I told myself I had done the right thing. I told myself Caroline needed the house and the farms were worthless anyway, and none of it would matter in the end. I told myself that for 3 more years. I found the business card on a Thursday morning in the breast pocket of Caroline's good blazer. I was not snooping. I want to make that clear. I was moving laundry from the bedroom chair to the hamper, the way I had done 1,000 times, and the card slipped out and fell face up on the hardwood floor, and I stood there looking at it for a moment before I picked it up. Victor Hale, principal developer. Hale Capital Group, a phone number with a Houston area code. The card was heavy stock cream colored, the kind of card that costs real money to print, because it is designed to feel like real money when someone puts it in your hand. I turned it over. Nothing on the back. I set it on the nightstand, straightened the stack of laundry, and went to make coffee. I did not say a word about it when Caroline came downstairs. Some things I had learned by then are better approached from a distance. I found out about Victor Hale the same way I found out about most things during those years, slowly in pieces, each piece small enough on its own that I could tell myself it did not mean what I suspected it meant. Caroline started going to what she called networking events, 2 or 3 evenings a month, coming home later than she said she would, smelling like the kind of restaurant we had not gone to together in years. She bought new clothes nicer than what she needed for a woman who did not leave the house for work. She laughed more often on her phone and less often in any room I was in. And Richard I, learned much later, had introduced them. He had invited Caroline to a commercial real estate seminar in Houston. About 8 months after the partition agreement was signed, The kind of event where developers and investors and people who wanted to appear to be developers and investors all circulated in a hotel ballroom and exchanged exactly those kinds of heavy, cream-colored business cards. Victor Hale had been there working the room with the ease of a man who had done it many times and knew precisely how to make each person feel like the most interesting one in the space. I never attended one of those events. I was usually working. Victor Hale, as I eventually came to understand him, was a particular type of man that cities like Houston produce in reliable quantities. He drove a white Mercedes that he leased on a rotating 18-month contract, always late model, always clean, because the appearance of wealth requires maintenance, the same way a real business does, just cheaper if you know the right workarounds. His office was a shared workspace in a glass building near the energy corridor, the kind of place where you could rent a private suite by the month and have your name on a placard by the elevator and receive visitors in a conference room with a downtown view, all for considerably less than it looked like it cost. The developments he described to investors did not exist. The land parcels he referenced in his pitch materials were either owned by other parties or encumbered by liens or simply invented. He had been doing variations of this same operation for the better part of a decade, moving between cities, adjusting the details, staying one step ahead of the complaints that eventually followed him everywhere he went. He was very good at it. And Caroline, who had spent the last several years feeling like she was slowly disappearing inside a life that had stopped delivering on its promises, was exactly the kind of person he was very good at finding. Richard knew what Victor was doing, or should have known. He was in commercial real estate. He had access to the same databases, the same public records, the same industry networks that would have taken an afternoon to reveal that Hale Capital Group had no verifiable assets and a principal with a history of civil complaints in 3 states. But Victor had promised Richard a piece of a $22 million development deal, and Richard wanted that piece badly enough that he chose not to look too carefully at the man offering it. That is the most charitable interpretation I have been able to construct. I have tried to hold on to it. Meanwhile, Carolyn had begun making changes to our shared accounts that I did not notice until much later. Our health savings account, the HSA, we had maintained for years to cover medical expenses funded through payroll deductions during the better years, had been steadily depleted. Under IRS rules, an HSA can only be used for qualified medical expenses. Withdrawals for anything else are treated as ordinary income and hit with an additional 20% penalty. Caroline had been pulling money from that account for months, not for doctor's visits or prescriptions, but for things that showed up later in credit card statements. I eventually went through dinners at restaurants I had never been to a weekend, at a resort in the hill country, clothes from stores, whose names I did not recognize. She had also, without telling me, contacted our insurance provider and canceled the supplemental coverage on my health policy. The base plan remained. The supplemental, the layer that covered the gap between what major procedures cost and what the base plan paid, was gone. She had collected the refund on the canceled premium and deposited it into an account I did not have access to. I did not know any of this yet. I found out in a hospital 4 months later, lying on a gurney with my right leg immobilized and a billing coordinator standing at the foot of my bed with an expression on her face that I will not forget for as long as I live. But on that Thursday morning, I just set Victor Hale's business card on the nightstand and went downstairs and made my coffee and told myself that the white Mercedes and the networking events and the new blazer were things I was not ready to understand yet. I was almost out of time for not being ready. I was fixing a pair of work boots at the kitchen table when the phone rang. Not my phone. Caroline's. It rang from the counter where she'd left it, charging screen lighting up, and she came in from the living room fast enough that I knew she'd been listening for it. She snatched it up before the second ring, and the moment she saw the name on the screen, her whole face changed. Not gradually, All at once, like someone had reached behind her eyes and turned a switch from off to on. "Richard, honey." Her voice went up half an octave, warm and bright in a way it had not been in any room I was in for longer than I could remember. "Tell me everything." I set down the boot and the tube of adhesive and watched her. She paced to the far end of the counter, one hand pressed flat against her collarbone, the way she did when she was genuinely excited, laughing at something Richard said before he had even finished saying it. I could hear his voice faintly through the phone, fast and animated words I couldn't quite make out, but whose shape I recognized, the shape of a man delivering news he had been waiting a long time to deliver. 22 million, Caroline breathed, and then louder, like she wanted the walls to hear it. "Richard, that is incredible. I am so proud of you." I picked up the boot again, turned it over in my hands. "Hey," I said. "Is that Richard? Let me say hi real quick." Caroline didn't look at me. She turned, not stepped, turned a deliberate rotation of her entire body so that her back was fully facing me, her shoulder angled like a door being closed, and she walked toward the hallway with the phone pressed tight against her ear. "You get that business sense straight from my side of the family," I heard her say. "Your grandfather was the same way. He could close a deal in his sleep." I sat at the kitchen table with a half-repaired boot in my hands and listened to my wife of nearly 30 years tell our son that his success came from her bloodline, in the same kitchen where I had signed away 3 farms to protect her, in the same house I had spent 20 years working to give her. And I felt something move through my chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived somewhere in the narrow, airless space between them. She came back eventually. The call had lasted nearly 20 minutes. She was still smiling when she walked back in. But the smile changed the instant her eyes found me, narrowed, slightly, pulled back at the corners the way a smile does when it was never meant for the person it's landing on. "He's doing well," she said, setting the phone back on the counter. "So I heard." I kept my voice even. 22 million. That's a big number. "It is." She opened the refrigerator and looked into it the way people do when they are not actually hungry, but need something to do with their hands. "Victor's project finally came through. Richard's going to be the regional director." Victor. She said the name the way you say the name of someone you talk about often enough that you have stopped noticing you use his first name. "Good for him," I said. Caroline pulled her good blazer from the hook by the hallway, the cream-colored one, and began checking her hair in the small mirror by the back door. "I'm going to go celebrate with them," she said. "Richard reserved a private room at Perry's." Perry's Steakhouse. I knew the place by reputation, the kind of restaurant where the cheapest thing on the menu costs more than I made in a shift. "I've got a call in tonight," I said. "Overnight inventory at the warehouse. Hendricks called short-staffed." Caroline paused in front of the mirror, lipstick in hand. "On a Saturday. Property taxes are due Thursday," I said. "I need the hours." She looked at my reflection in the mirror for exactly 1 second, then looked back at herself and finished applying the lipstick. "Don't forget the electric bill," she said. "It's on the counter. Pay it before Monday or they'll charge the late fee." She said it the way you say, pick up milk or take out the trash. Not meanly, not even coldly, just efficiently, the way you speak to someone whose primary function has become logistical. She left without looking back. I sat at the kitchen table for a while after the sound of her car faded down the street. The half-repaired boot was still in front of me. The electric bill was on the counter, just like she said, rubber-banded to a past-due notice from the county tax assessor. I picked up the tube of adhesive and finished the boot, pressed the sole firm, set it aside to dry. Then I changed into my work clothes, poured the last of the coffee into a travel mug, and drove to the warehouse. The parking lot was half empty at that hour on a Saturday. The overnight crew was small 6 of us, mostly younger guys who needed the weekend premium. I clocked in at 8:50, and Dale Hutchins was already gone for the day, the floor supervised by a kid named Marcus, who couldn't have been more than 25 and walked around with a clipboard like it gave him authority. I took my assignment inventory audit on the East Wing pallets 12 through 47 and got to work. At some point, probably around 9:30, I let myself think about what Richard was doing at that exact moment. Perry's Steakhouse, the private room champagne that cost more per bottle than I made in a week. Victor Hale raising a glass. Caroline laughing at something the way she used to laugh with me. Richard posting a photo to his phone with some caption about new beginnings. I pushed the forklift to the next pallet. Then the one after that. The East Wing had a section of floor near pallet 31 that I had written up in the maintenance log 3 weeks ago, a buckled seam where 2 concrete pours had separated slightly, just enough to catch a wheel if you came through at the wrong angle. I had written it up. I had been specific about the location. Nobody had fixed it. I came around the corner at standard speed, the load centered, nothing unusual. And then the front left wheel caught the edge of that seam, and the mast torqued, and 1,000 pounds of boxed equipment on the top shelf shifted in the space of half a second, and I heard the sound of metal under stress. A deep resonant groan that I understood before I could process it, and then the shelf came down. The pain was immediate and total white, and obliterating the kind of pain that doesn't feel like pain at first, because your brain genuinely cannot categorize something that large. I heard myself make a sound I did not recognize as my own voice. The forklift had stalled. Something had me pinned from the right knee down, and when I tried to move my leg, the pain spiked so hard that the edges of my vision went dark, and I had to grip the steering column with both hands just to stay conscious. "Hey!" A voice somewhere above me. "Hey, somebody call 911 right now. George, look at me." Dale's voice. But Dale was gone for the day. Dale had left at 5. I found out later that Dale had come back to pick up a jacket he'd forgotten. Of all the things that happened that night, that is the one I keep coming back to. Dale came back for a jacket. "George." His face appeared above me, red and strained, his big hands already moving to assess what was holding me. "Stay awake. You hear me? I've got you. Stay awake." I tried to tell him I was fine. The words came out wrong. 911 is on the line." Marcus's voice high and frightened from somewhere to my left. Dale grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard I could feel my knuckles compress. "You're going to be okay," he said, and his voice was steady in the way that voices get when a person is working very hard to make them steady. "I've got you, George. I'm right here." The overhead lights seemed very bright suddenly. I focused on Dale's face, and I thought for no reason I could name about Melissa. About the way she looked up from her textbooks when I walked in. About the coffee she always had ready. Then the paramedics arrived, and the lights got brighter, and I stopped thinking about anything at all. I came back to consciousness in the ambulance. Not all at once. First the steady double tone of a cardiac monitor, someone speaking in clipped shorthand I could hear, but not decode. Then the light too bright. Then the pain, which arrived last, and made everything else irrelevant. My right leg was immobilized from the knee down. Every small movement of the vehicle sent a current of pain up through my hip that made me grip the side rail until my fingers went numb. A paramedic watched me with careful attention. "There he is. George, you're in the ambulance. 4 minutes from Fort Bend Memorial. You with me?" "I'm with you," I said. My voice came out thin and scraped. "Pain level 1 to 10. 8, I said. Maybe 9. She adjusted something on the IV line running into my left arm. The pain moved slightly further off like a fire burning on the other side of a window. At Fort Bend Memorial, they moved fast. Within 20 minutes, a doctor appeared, gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, the unhurried manner of someone who has seen worse than this before breakfast. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Patricia Newman, orthopedic surgery." She shook my hand. "You have fractures in 2 locations in the right tibia. The lower fracture produced a bone fragment pressing against the peroneal nerve, the nerve controlling movement and sensation in your foot. If we leave it, there is significant risk of permanent nerve damage. We need to go in tonight." The room contracted around me. "Tonight," I repeated. "Every hour increases the risk," she said, and left to begin prep. A woman appeared in the foot of my bed, tablet in hand, apologetic expression already in place. Her name tag read, "Becky Turner, Patient Financial Services. The supplemental coverage on your Blue Cross policy was canceled 4 months ago by a co-policyholder. She had been on the policy since we first took it out, back when the farms were running and everything was in both our names." Becky paused. "The hospital requires a deposit of $3,200 before we can book the operating room." The number landed in my chest like something thrown from a height. I called the insurance company after she stepped out. The representative confirmed it. $9,000 had been withdrawn from our health savings account over 11 months by the secondary account holder. Under IRS regulations, HSA funds can only be used for qualified medical expenses. Anything else triggers income tax plus a 20% penalty on every dollar. I put the phone on my chest and stared at the ceiling. Dale appeared 20 minutes later, cap in both hands, the way men hold their caps in places that make them feel the weight of things. "He picked up," Dale said quietly. "I told him you were hurt. He asked if it was life-threatening. I said we weren't sure yet." Dale's jaw tightened, knuckles white around the brim. "He said it could wait. Said he was with clients." The cardiac monitor beeped steadily. "I found Melissa's number in your wallet," Dale said. "The card behind your license. I'm sorry I didn't lead with her, George. I should have." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. My voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. "Thank you for coming back for that jacket." Dale pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, eyes bright and wet at the corners, and said, "You're going to be fine, George. You are going to be fine." I held on to that. It was the most valuable thing anyone had said to me all night, and it came from a man who had never once asked about my farms. I knew how the call with Richard was going to go before I dialed. I dialed anyway, because that is what a father does. You swallow every reasonable instinct you have, and you dial your son's number, and you hope that the person who picks up is not the person you have been watching him become for the last several years. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Behind his voice was exactly what I expected: music, the clink of glassware, a woman laughing at something just off to the left of the phone. Perry's Steakhouse in full swing. "Dad." Not a question, not concern, just identification, flat and slightly impatient, the voice of a man who has seen the caller ID and is already calculating the shortest path to ending the conversation. "Richard." I kept my voice as even as I could, which took more effort than it should have. "I need to tell you something. I had an accident at the warehouse tonight. My right leg is broken in 2 places. There's a bone fragment pressing on a nerve, and they need to operate tonight, or I could lose function in my foot permanently." A pause. The party sounds continued behind him, indifferent. "They need a $3,200 deposit before they'll book the operating room," I said. "My supplemental insurance was canceled. I don't have it, Richard." Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, something in his voice had gone flat and cold in a way that reminded me of a door being closed from the inside. "Dad?" He exhaled slowly. "Did you call me to ask for money?" My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. "I called you because I am your father, and I am in a hospital, and I need help." I just closed a $22 million deal, Richard said, and his voice carried something I can only describe as offense, genuine, indignant offense, like I had interrupted something sacred. That money is committed to a project. It is not a personal checking account I can just pull from whenever. Richard. My voice cracked on the second syllable. Just slightly. I hated it. I am not asking for $22 million. I am asking for $3,200, so that I can keep the ability to walk. A beat of silence. Then quietly, with a coldness that I felt move through my chest, like something swallowed wrong. At your age, Dad, how many more working years do you have left anyway? If you can't walk, use a wheelchair. It's not like you're running a business that needs you on your feet. The cardiac monitor beeped. Once, twice, 3 times. Before I could answer, I heard the phone shift, the muffled sound of it being transferred. And then Caroline's voice came on sharp and tight with the particular anger of a woman whose evening has been interrupted. George, do not do this tonight. He just had the biggest moment of his career. You are not going to pull him away from that. Caroline, I said, I might not walk right after this. You have a daughter, she snapped. Call her. That's what she's always wanted, to be the one who swoops in. Let her do it. A pause, and then lower and faster, like she was turning away from the table. Don't call back tonight. The line went dead. I set the phone on my chest and looked at the ceiling and breathed. In and out. In and out. The fluorescent light above me hummed at a frequency I could feel in my back teeth. After a while, I picked the phone back up and called the life insurance company. Not because I had planned to, but because I was updating emergency information after an accident, standard procedure, the kind of thing a man thinks about when he is lying in a hospital bed, wondering if the surgery is going to go the way the doctor says it will. The representative was polite and efficient. She confirmed my policy details, updated my contact information, and then, before I could end the call, said something in the careful, neutral tone of someone reading from a script. Mr. Whitmore, I do want to note we have a record here of an inquiry on this policy approximately 6 weeks ago. A co-beneficiary called to ask about the claims disbursement process in the event that the insured did not survive a surgical procedure. A brief pause. I want to confirm, was that inquiry initiated by you or authorized by you? I heard the words. I understood each one individually. Together they took a moment longer. No, I said. It was not. Thank you for confirming that, sir. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? I told her no. I ended the call. I folded my hands on my chest, right over left, and I looked at that humming fluorescent light for a very long time. I did not cry. I was past crying by then. Some things land so far beyond the reach of tears that all you can do is lie very still and let them settle into whatever part of you is built to carry things that cannot be put down. The door swung open 40 minutes later, and Melissa ran in with her hair soaked from the rain, still wearing her school clothes from that morning. And the look on her face was the first thing I had seen all night that did not make the world feel smaller. Before I tell you what Melissa did next, and I promise you, this is the part that will stay with you, drop a 1 in the comments right now so I know you're still with me. Every single comment means the world. A gentle reminder. This story includes some fictional elements shaped for reflection and meaningful storytelling. If that's not your thing, it's completely okay to step away now. She was still catching her breath when she reached my bedside. Her hair was dripping onto the collar of her blouse, the same pale blue blouse she had worn to work that morning 12 hours ago, in what felt like a different lifetime. She had driven through the rain without stopping to get a jacket, without stopping for anything, and she stood there at the side of my bed, with her chest heaving and her eyes moving over me in the fast, assessing way of someone who needs to know exactly how bad things are before they can decide what to do about it. Dad. Her voice broke on the word, just slightly, just enough. She grabbed my hand with both of hers and squeezed hard. "Tell me what happened. All of it." So I told her. I kept it factual, kept my voice level, because I could see the effort it was taking her to hold herself together, and I did not want to be the thing that pushed her over the edge. She listened without interrupting, her hands tightening around mine each time I got to a part that was worse than the part before it. When I finished, she stood up straight and turned to find Dr. Newman, who had come back in quietly while I was talking. "When can he go into surgery?" Melissa asked. No preamble, no softening. Just the question, direct and clear, the way she had always approached problems that mattered. Dr. Newman looked at her with the measured respect that professionals extend to people who skip the panic and go straight to the practical. "As soon as financial clearance is confirmed, the OR team is on standby." Melissa turned to Becky Turner, who was waiting near the door with her tablet. "What's the number?" $3,200, Becky said. "I'm sorry." Melissa pulled out her phone. She opened her banking app and looked at the screen for exactly 2 seconds. I watched her face while she looked at it. Something moved through her expression, not despair, not hesitation, just a fast, quiet calculation. The kind that happens when a person decides that the only variable that matters has already been decided and everything else is just logistics. She stepped into the hallway. Through the gap in the curtain, I could see her pacing phone pressed to her ear. One call short-ended fast. Then another number. I heard her voice low and urgent. "Richard, I need you to listen to me. Dad has a fracture pressing on a nerve. If they don't operate tonight, he could lose the use of his foot. They need $3,200. That's it. That's all." A pause. Whatever Richard said, it was brief. Melissa's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle jump in her cheek from across the room. Her free hand came up and pressed flat against the wall like she needed something solid to push against. "You have $22 million, Richard," she said. And her voice was very quiet and very controlled in the way that voices get when a person is choosing each word the way you choose footing on ice. "I am not asking you to give it away. I am asking you to loan our father $3,200 so that he can walk." Another pause. "That's your answer." Not a question. She already knew. She ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment, with her hand still flat against the wall and her eyes closed, and I saw her chest rise and fall once very deliberately before she opened her eyes and straightened her shoulders and came back in. She did not tell me what Richard had said. She didn't need to. Instead, she scrolled to another number and dialed. When it connected, she moved back toward the hallway, but I could hear her through the curtain. Her voice lower now, different in register, not pleading, just honest with the stripped-down directness of someone who has no time left for anything but the truth. "Tom, it's Melissa Whitmore. I'm sorry to call this late. My dad's in the hospital and I need to sell the Civic tonight. I need the money in the next hour. I know it's Saturday. I know it's almost midnight. I wouldn't call if I had another option." Tom Grady. He ran a small used car operation off Farm Road 762, the kind of place with a hand-painted sign and a gravel lot, and maybe 30 cars at any given time, the kind of dealership that runs on local reputation and repeat customers and the owner's personal cell number on every business card, because he is the business. Melissa had bought the Civic from him 4 years ago. She had sent him a Christmas card every year since. He told her to meet him at the lot in 30 minutes. Melissa came back in, picked up her purse, and looked at me with eyes that were glassy but not spilling, holding it back through what I could only describe as sheer force of will. "I'll be back in an hour," she said. "Melissa." My throat had gone tight and rough. "That car is how you get to work." "I'll figure out work." She leaned down and put her hand against the side of my face, warm and certain. You are not going to lose the use of your foot because I am attached to a car. That is not going to happen. Do you understand me? I could not answer. The tightness in my throat had become something larger, something that was pressing against the backs of my eyes, and I was 60 years old, and I had not cried in front of my daughter since she was 7 years old. But I came very close in that moment. I pressed my lips together and nodded, and she held my face in her hand for one more second before she straightened up and walked out. Dr. Newman appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, "your daughter is something else." "Yeah," I said. My voice came out thick. "She is." Melissa was back in 53 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall above the door for every one of them. She came through the curtain with color high in her cheeks and rain still in her hair, and an envelope that she set on the bed beside my hand without ceremony. "2,500 cash," she said. "Tom gave me more than I asked for. He said—" She stopped, pressed her lips together for a moment, then pushed through it. "He said to tell you he hopes you're back on your feet soon." Her voice wavered on the last 3 words, and she pulled it back visibly physically, like reeling in a line. "The billing office is processing the rest through a payment arrangement. We're covered." She reached across and took my hand again. The same grip as before, 2 hands around one of mine, firm and unshaking. "You're going in tonight, Dad," she said. "It's already done." I looked at my daughter, 28 years old, soaking wet, having just sold her car in a gravel lot at midnight, and I tried to find something to say that was equal to what she had just done. I could not find it. There are no words built to carry that kind of weight. "Your car," I managed. "Cars can be replaced," Melissa said, and she meant it every syllable without drama and without self-pity and without any expectation of credit. "You can't." They came for me at 2:17 in the morning. 2 nurses and an orderly, efficient and gentle. Melissa walked alongside the gurney all the way to the doors of the surgical suite, her hand wrapped around my fingers, not letting go until the doors physically required it. Right before they took me through, she leaned down close to my ear. "You are the most stubborn man I have ever known in my life," she said, and her voice only broke once on the last word, just barely. "Use it." The doors swung shut behind me, and I did. I woke up with a tube in my throat and a pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my leg, not physical pain. Something older and quieter than that, the kind that lives in the part of a man that keeps score even when he has told himself he has stopped keeping score. I lay in the recovery room with the ceiling tiles swimming slightly above me, and the distant beeping of monitors, and the feel of Melissa's voice still somewhere in my chest, "Use it, use it, use it." And I thought, I am alive. The surgery worked, and my wife did not call. Dr. Newman came by in the early afternoon, still in her scrubs, a coffee cup in one hand, and the particular unhurried energy of a surgeon who has been on her feet since before dawn and has made peace with that. "Clean repair," she said, pulling a stool to the side of my bed and sitting down like she had all the time in the world, which I suspected she did not. "Both fractures are set and stable. The fragment is out. Peroneal nerve looks good, no permanent damage that I can see." She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup. "You're going to need 6 to 8 weeks of physical therapy before I want you putting full weight on that leg. And I mean real therapy, Mr. Whitmore. Not stopping when it hurts." "I understand," I said. "Good." She stood, smoothed her scrubs. "Your daughter has been in the waiting room since 2:30 this morning. She fell asleep about an hour ago. I had a nurse put a blanket on her." A pause. "You raised her right." I did not trust my voice enough to answer that. I just nodded. Melissa was beside my bed when I came fully awake the second time, sitting in the plastic chair, with her legs folded under her and her head tipped against the wall, the blanket the nurse had given her still wrapped around her shoulders. Her school clothes were wrinkled beyond recovery. There was a coffee cup on the floor beside the chair that had gone cold hours ago. She had not gone home to change. She had not gone home at all. I watched her sleep for a while. She had her mother's cheekbones and my stubborn set to the jaw, and in sleep she looked younger than 28, younger than all the things I had watched her carry in the past 12 hours. And I felt something move through me that was too large for the room and too specific for a word. When she woke, her eyes found mine immediately, and the relief that crossed her face was so raw and unguarded that it made my chest ache in the good way, the way that reminds you that you are still connected to something that matters. "Hey," she said. Her voice was rough from sleep. "You look terrible." "You look worse," I said. She laughed, and it came out waterlogged and real, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth like she was trying to hold something in, and her eyes went bright and wet, and she shook her head and looked at the ceiling for a moment before she pulled herself back together. "Dr. Newman says it went well," Melissa said. "She told me, clean repair." "Yeah." She unwrapped herself from the blanket, sat up straight, pushed her hair back from her face. All business now the way she got when she had decided that the feeling part was finished and the doing part needed to start. "We need to talk about the follow-up costs, the physical therapy, the medications. I've been making some calls." "Melissa, I'm listing the house," she said. Not loudly, just clearly the way she said things she had already decided. "I have enough equity built up that I can take a short-term loan against it while the sale processes. It'll cover the therapy and the prescriptions and whatever else comes up." The house, the small 2-bedroom off Brazos Street that she had saved for put a down payment on, painted herself over a long weekend 4 years ago because she couldn't afford to hire anyone. The house she had sent me photos of the day she got the keys, beaming in the doorway in paint-stained overalls. "That's your home," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "I know what it is." She reached over and put her hand on my forearm, firm and warm. "And I know what you are. You're more important than a house, Dad. That's not even a close call for me." I closed my eyes for a moment, opened them. "You're going to need somewhere to live. I've got a 2-bedroom apartment lined up 2 blocks from school, month to month." She gave me a look that cut off the next thing I was going to say before I could say it. "Don't. Okay? Just don't." I didn't. 5 days I spent in that hospital. 5 days of physical therapists and medication schedules and the slow, grinding work of learning to move a leg that did not want to cooperate. 5 days of Melissa showing up every morning before her shift, and every evening after it bringing food from the cafeteria that she insisted was better than it looked, which it was not. 5 days during which my phone received no calls from Caroline, no texts, no voicemails asking whether the surgery had worked, whether I could walk, whether I was alive. Richard sent a text on day 3. It read, "Hope you're recovering okay. Let me know if you need anything." I read it twice. I did not respond. There did not seem to be anything to say that the silence couldn't say more accurately. Melissa drove me to her apartment on a Thursday afternoon in a rental car she had reserved because she no longer had her own. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building off Grand Parkway, 1 bedroom that she had given to me, and a pull-out couch in the living room that she had taken for herself without discussion or complaint. The walls were the kind of off-white that landlords choose because it shows nothing, and there were plants on the windowsill that she had clearly been keeping alive through considerable effort and there were papers and lesson plans spread across the kitchen table that she swept into a neat stack when I came through the door so I would have a place to sit. And there on the refrigerator, held up by a small magnet shaped like a red apple, the kind of magnet you get at a school supply store, was a handwritten schedule. Her handwriting precise and slightly tilted to the right, the way it had always been. 5:30 a.m. wake, 6:10 a.m. depart. Bus 47 northbound 618. Transfer bus 12 at Westheimer 6:49. School arrival 7:45. I stood in front of that refrigerator for a long time. My daughter had mapped out a new life on a piece of notebook paper and stuck it to her refrigerator with a red apple magnet, and had not said one word to me about what it had cost her to do it. No complaint. No accounting. No quiet sighs designed to be heard. Just a schedule, precise and practical, written in her slightly tilted handwriting, because that was what the situation required. And she was the kind of person who made a plan and worked the plan and did not ask anyone to feel sorry for her for doing it. Somewhere across town, my son was sleeping in an apartment with a parking garage and a doorman. My daughter was going to wake up at 5:30 in the morning and walk to a bus stop in the Texas heat and transfer lines twice to get to a job that paid her $40,000 a year because she had sold her car and her house to keep me alive. I looked at that schedule every single morning for the next 9 days, every morning without exception. And every morning it sat in my chest like something I had swallowed whole, and could not put down something that was equal parts grief and gratitude, and a slow building clarity about exactly what I owed and to whom. Recovery, I discovered, is not a single event. It is 1,000 small negotiations between what your body used to be able to do and what it can manage today, conducted in the narrow hallway of someone else's apartment, with a pair of aluminum crutches that left red marks on the insides of my arms, and a right leg that sent sharp electrical complaints up through my hip every time I put any weight on it at all. I had been told 6 to 8 weeks of physical therapy. What that meant in practice was this: every morning I woke before 5 on Melissa's pull-out couch and lay there listening to her molt around in the kitchen, getting ready for a day that started at 5:30 because she no longer had a car and the bus did not wait. I would hear the coffee maker, the quiet thud of cabinet doors, the sound of her bag zipping closed. Then the front door, soft and careful so as not to wake me. Then silence. Then I would get up and work. I walked the hallway first, 8 steps to the bathroom door, 8 steps back, then 10, then 12. The crutches were for balance more than weight. Dr. Newman had said the leg needed to learn to trust itself again, and the only way to teach it was to use it even when it screamed at you to stop. So I used it. I thought about Richard's voice saying, "At your age, use a wheelchair," and I put my foot down on that floor every single morning, and I walked. The hook on the wall beside the front door bothered me more than I expected. It was a simple thing, a brass hook, the kind you find in any hardware store for $2 mounted at shoulder height next to the door. Melissa had hung it herself, probably within a week of moving in the way people do when they are making a place their own. For the first 3 years she had lived here, her car keys had hung on that hook every night when she came home. A simple civic key on a ring with a small metal disc that said "Grateful" in stamped letters, the kind of thing you buy at a checkout counter and end up keeping. The hook was empty now. Had been since the night she sold the car. Every time I passed it on my morning walks, I looked at it, and every time I looked at it, something moved through me that I could not entirely name. Dale came on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days into my recovery, showing up at the door with a foil-wrapped package of tamales from a place off Highway 90 that he said was the best in Fort Bend County, which was a serious claim in a county that took tamales seriously. He sat at Melissa's kitchen table across from me with his cap on the seat beside him and his big hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and we talked about the warehouse. Marcus, the young floor supervisor, had apparently tried to reorganize the East Wing inventory system and created a chaos that Dale was still untangling, and it was for a while exactly what I needed. Normal. Familiar. The easy back and forth of men who know each other well enough to sit in comfortable conversation without performing anything. Then Dale set his coffee mug down and looked at the table for a moment, and I knew from the way he did it that something was coming. "George," he said, "there's something else I've been wanting to tell you since the hospital, and I keep almost saying it, and then not saying it, and I've decided that's not right." He looked up. "You deserve to know the full picture." "Tell me," I said. Dale wrapped both hands around his mug again. "When I called Richard that night, I told you he said it could wait. That's true, but there's a part I left out." He exhaled slowly. "Before he said that, he asked me how it happened. I told him the shelf gave way. And he actually asked me whether the warehouse was going to be liable, whether there was going to be a workman's comp situation." Dale's jaw tightened until I could see the muscle working in his cheek. "That was his second question, George. Before he asked if you were conscious. Before he asked how bad the leg was. He asked if the warehouse was going to be sued." The kitchen felt very quiet around that sentence. My coffee mug was warm in my hands. I held onto it and looked at the red apple magnet on the refrigerator and thought about a $22 million contract and a private room at Perry's Steakhouse and a text message on day 3 that said, "Hope you're recovering okay." "Thank you for telling me," I said. My voice came out level and even, which surprised me slightly. Dale nodded. He picked up his coffee. "How's the leg today? Better than yesterday?" I said. "Worse than tomorrow." He smiled at that, a small, real smile, and we finished the tamales and talked about the Houston Astros for a while. And when he left, he gripped my hand at the door the way he had gripped it in the warehouse that night, solid and certain, and said, "You call me if you need anything. I mean that, George. Anything at all." After he left, I stood in the hallway for a while, not walking for therapy, just standing. The apartment was very quiet. Melissa's lesson plans were stacked on the kitchen table. A half-finished cup of her morning coffee was still on the counter from 6 hours ago, gone completely cold. I opened the drawer in the kitchen table to look for a pen and found beneath a takeout menu and a phone charger and a rubber band ball the size of a golf ball, a piece of notebook paper folded into quarters. I should have left it there. I know that. It was not mine to read. I unfolded it anyway. It was a list. Melissa's handwriting, precise and slightly right-tilted. At the top, in letters, she had underlined twice, "if needed." Below that, in a column, "gold necklace, mom's graduation gift. Pawn or sell privately. Laptop old but working. Facebook Marketplace, maybe $200. College textbooks, accounting still boxed in the closet. Half-price books. Grandma's watch gold band. Check with the jewelry store on Main." I read it twice. Then I folded it back into quarters exactly the way it had been and placed it back in the drawer beneath the takeout menu and the phone charger and the rubber band ball. I pushed the drawer closed. I stood in that kitchen with my hands flat on the counter and my leg throbbing in its slow, steady way. And I thought about my daughter standing in a gravel parking lot at midnight, selling her car to a man she trusted, and then coming home to this apartment and sitting at this table and making a list of everything else she was prepared to give up, if that was not enough. Her mother's necklace, her grandmother's watch, things that could not be replaced by money once they were gone. She had written them down calmly and practically, the way she approached every problem, and she had put the list in a drawer and had not said one word to me about it. I was not going to say anything to her about it either. Some things a person does not need to know they were seen doing. The doing was enough. The seeing was mine to carry. I went back to the hallway and I walked. 8 steps, 10, 12, 14. The 9th morning a knock came at the door. Not the soft, apologetic knock of a neighbor. A firm, deliberate double knock, the kind that means official business. I made my way to the door and opened it. The mail carrier was a middle-aged man with a leather satchel and the mild, unhurried expression of someone who has delivered every kind of news to every kind of door and no longer has strong feelings about any of it. "Got some certified mail here," he said. "I need a signature for both." He held out an electronic pad. I signed it twice. He handed me 2 envelopes, nodded once, and walked back down the hallway toward the elevator. I stood in the doorway holding those 2 envelopes and looked at the return addresses. The first one I did not recognize at first, a corporate name with development group in it that did not immediately mean anything to me. The second one I recognized immediately because I had been receiving mail from that office for 12 years and it never got easier to see it. United States Department of Agriculture. Office of Inspector General. I closed the door. I sat down at Melissa's kitchen table. I set both envelopes in front of me. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady. Before I reveal what was inside those 2 envelopes, 2 letters that changed absolutely everything leave us still here in the comments. I want to know who's made it this far with me. Just a note, parts of this story have been shaped with fictional details for depth and purpose. If you'd rather not continue, no hard feelings at all. I opened the USDA envelope first. Not because I knew what was in it. I had been receiving mail from that office for 12 years. Status updates, procedural notices, requests for documentation, form letters that said nothing in a great many carefully chosen words. I had trained myself not to expect anything from those envelopes except more of the same. More waiting, more process, more of the particular bureaucratic silence that had become the background noise of my life. So I opened it, the way I had opened every one of its predecessors, carefully, without urgency, the way you open something when you have already made your peace with disappointment. The letter was 2 pages long. The first paragraph identified the case number, the investigating agency, and the scope of the original inquiry. Standard language. I have read versions of it dozens of times. Then the second paragraph. I read it once. Then I went back and read it again more slowly, each word separately, the way you read something when your brain is insisting that you must have misunderstood. The forensic digital analysis of all documents associated with Agri-Supply Solutions had been completed. A team of handwriting analysts and document authentication specialists had examined every signature attributed to George Allen Whitmore across the entirety of the case files. Their conclusion, reached unanimously and confirmed by independent review, was that none of the signatures in question were authentic. Every one of them had been produced through a combination of digital manipulation and physical forgery. George Allen Whitmore had not signed any of the documents. George Allen Whitmore had not received any of the payments. George Allen Whitmore had no involvement, knowing or otherwise, in the fraudulent scheme conducted by Agri-Supply Solutions and its principals. Effective immediately, all asset control orders on the 3 Whitmore Farm properties in Fort Bend County were lifted. All federal encumbrances on said properties were dissolved. George Allen Whitmore was free to sell, transfer mortgage, or otherwise dispose of the properties as he saw fit. The letter was signed by Agent Karen Mills, special agent in charge. I set it down on the table. I looked at the wall above the refrigerator. There was a small water stain in the shape of nothing in particular. I looked at it for a while. 12 years. 12 years of property taxes on land I could not touch. 12 years of my credit sitting in a ditch. 12 years of Carolyn's silence at dinner tables and Richard's voice saying people only get investigated when they do something suspicious, and the particular loneliness of being a man that the people closest to him have already decided the verdict on. 12 years. And it was over. In 2 pages. With a signature from a woman I had met once standing in my driveway, with her badge out, telling me to cooperate and wait. I had cooperated. I had waited. Turns out that was the right call. I picked up the second envelope. The return address read Cornerstone Urban Development Group, LLC, Houston, Texas. I did not recognize the name. I opened it with slightly less steadiness than I had managed with the first one, my thumbnail catching on the flap, tearing it unevenly. Inside was a letter on heavy cream stock, 3 pages, professional and precise. The opening paragraph introduced Cornerstone Urban Development Group and described their current project, a large-scale mixed-use development in western Fort Bend County, incorporating residential housing, medical facilities, commercial retail, and a connector road linking to the newly completed expansion of State Highway 99, also known as the Grand Parkway. The second paragraph noted that Cornerstone had identified 3 adjacent parcels in Fort Bend County as ideal for incorporation into the project's commercial phase. The parcels were described by their tax identification numbers. I knew those numbers the way I knew my own Social Security number. I had written them on tax forms for 12 years. The third paragraph contained the offer. Cornerstone Urban Development Group was prepared to make a cash offer for all 3 parcels to be purchased together as a single transaction. The offered price, subject to standard due diligence and title review, was $26 million. After the payoff of all remaining property liens, back taxes, accumulated legal fees, and associated closing costs, the net proceeds to the seller were estimated at approximately $18.7 million. I read that number 4 times. Then I put the letter face down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth slowly, the way Dr. Newman had told me to breathe when the pain got bad enough to make me dizzy. $18.7 million. 3 weeks ago, I had been lying on a concrete floor in a warehouse with a bone fragment pressing on a nerve, and my son had told me to get a wheelchair, and my daughter had sold her car in a gravel parking lot at midnight, and my account, my actual bank account, had contained less money than it cost to fill the Silverado's gas tank. 3 weeks ago. I lifted my head and looked at the refrigerator. The bus schedule was there, held up by the red Apple magnet, Melissa's handwriting tilting slightly to the right. 5:30 wake. 6:10 depart. Bus 47 northbound. Transfer at Westheimer. School by 7:45. She was there right now. In a classroom somewhere, teaching long division or state capitals or how to sound out words that don't follow the rules in her school clothes and her flat shoes, because she had sold her car and her house and had made a list in a drawer of everything else she was prepared to sell, and she had done all of it without a single word of complaint and without any expectation that the universe was going to balance the ledger. I thought about Richard at Perry's Steakhouse. I thought about Caroline's voice saying, "You have a daughter, call her." I thought about Dale's voice saying he asked if the warehouse was going to be sued. I thought about a brass hook beside a front door with nothing on it. I did not whoop. I did not laugh. I did not cry, though I came closer to it in that moment than I had in a very long time, and I am not too proud to say so. I just sat very still at my daughter's kitchen table in my daughter's apartment with the 2 most important pieces of paper I had ever held, and I let the stillness of it settle into me the way the truth settles in when it finally arrives after a very long time away. Then I picked up my phone. I did not call Caroline. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what came later. I did not call Richard. I did not call anyone who had looked at me in the last 12 years and seen a liability instead of a person. I scrolled to a number I had not dialed in over a year and pressed call. It rang twice. Samuel Porter. His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Quiet and careful. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years listening to other people's problems and had learned that the most important thing you can do when someone calls you is make them feel that you have all the time in the world. "Samuel," I said, "it's George Whitmore." A pause, then warmer. "George, Lord, it's good to hear your voice. Melissa reached out a few weeks back, told me about the accident. How's the leg?" "Getting there," I said. "Samuel, I need you to do something for me before we talk about anything else. I need you to pull the partition agreement, the one Caroline had executed about 3 years back. The one Richard witnessed." A longer pause this time. "I remember it very well, George," Samuel said carefully. "Pull it," I said. "Read me every word. Don't leave anything out." And Samuel. I looked at the bus schedule one more time at the red apple magnet at Melissa's handwriting, tilting slightly to the right. "Don't call anyone else until we've talked. Not a soul." "Understood," Samuel said. "Give me 2 hours." I set the phone down on the table beside the 2 letters and I sat back in the chair and I looked at the ceiling and I felt for the first time in 12 years something that I had almost forgotten how to recognize. Clarity. Clean and cold and absolute, like water from a well that goes very deep. Samuel called back in 1 hour and 43 minutes. I had been watching the clock above the refrigerator the entire time, the way a man watches a clock, when everything he has left is riding on what comes next. I picked up before the second ring. "George." His voice was careful and steady, the voice of a man who has spent 40 years delivering information that changes lives and has learned that how you say it matters as much as what you say. "I've got everything in front of me. Let me start with the partition agreement." "Go ahead," I said. He read me the operative language directly word for word. "Each party waives any and all present or future claims to the other's separate property, including any proceeds or value realized therefrom, regardless of cause, regardless of circumstance, regardless of any change in financial status subsequent to execution." "Regardless of cause," I said. "Regardless of cause," Samuel confirmed. "George, under Texas Family Code Section 4.102, that agreement properly executed before a licensed notary, seal on record, converted those 3 farms into your sole separate property the day it was signed. Whatever they're worth today, Caroline signed away her legal claim to every dollar. Voluntarily. In writing. With her son as witness." I pressed the phone against my ear and looked at the hook beside the door, still empty, still waiting. "Richard witnessed it," I said. "He did. Which brings me to something else." Samuel's voice shifted slightly. "When I compared your original signed copy to the version filed with the county clerk, I found a discrepancy. The filed version contains an additional clause, Addendum C, that does not appear in the document you signed. It grants Richard advisory consultation rights over any future sale or transfer of your separate property and requires 30 days advance notice to him before any transaction." My hand tightened on the phone. "I didn't sign that," I said. "No," Samuel said. "You didn't. There is no separate acknowledgement signature from you, which is required under Texas Family Code, Section 4.104, for any modification to a partition agreement. The clause is void." He paused. "But adding language to a signed legal document without the other party's knowledge, depending on how a court reads it, that could constitute fraud in the execution under Texas Penal Code Section 32.46. Another pause. I'm keeping that in reserve. I sat very still with that for a moment. There's one more thing, Samuel said. I made some calls about Victor Hale. He's operated under 4 different business names across 3 states, civil judgments in Harris County, an open FBI inquiry in Houston. Samuel exhaled. The $22 million wasn't a real estate transaction, George. It was capital Victor was raising from private investors using fraudulent property documents as collateral. Richard signed personal guarantees on several of those agreements. Victor withdrew the funds 10 days ago and disappeared. Richard is currently guarantor on somewhere between $3 and $4 million of debt with no assets behind it. I thought about Perry's Steakhouse. Day 1 of a new empire. He had been standing on Victor Hale, and Victor Hale was gone. George, Samuel said quietly, what do you want to do? I looked at the hook beside the door with nothing on it. I thought about a folded piece of paper in a kitchen drawer, with, if needed, written at the top in my daughter's handwriting. Move on, the cornerstone offer, I said. 30-day close. Keep it completely private until the ink is dry. And Samuel, I want a trust established simultaneously, irrevocable. Melissa is the sole beneficiary. Everything goes into it. That trust will be untouchable, Samuel said. The farms are your sole separate property. There's no viable legal basis for anyone to challenge proceeds from their sale. Good. First priority, pay off every dollar Melissa borrowed for my medical costs. Today, if you can manage a wire. End of business, he said. And there's a house on Brazos Street she sold 3 weeks ago to keep me alive. Find out who bought it. Offer them whatever they need to say yes. I want her to have it back. Samuel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something underneath the professional steadiness that I had not heard from him in a long time. I'll make the calls this afternoon, he said. George, it took 12 years, but it came around. I set the phone down beside the 2 letters and looked out the window at the parking lot 3 floors below. Ordinary cars in the afternoon sun. An ordinary Thursday. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, just being a man who finally knew exactly what he was going to do next and had everything he needed to do it. The closing took place on a Thursday morning in September, 31 days after I had sat at Melissa's kitchen table with 2 envelopes and a clarity I had not felt in 12 years. Samuel's office was on the 4th floor of a building off Highway 90 in Richmond. A modest space with good light and walls lined with the kind of organized files that tell you everything you need to know about the man who keeps them. He had arranged the documents in the order they needed to be signed, which turned out to be a considerable stack: the purchase agreement, the title transfer documents, the trust formation papers, the beneficiary designations, the property deed transfers into the trust. He walked me through each one without rushing, explaining what I was signing and why, the way he had done with every contract I had ever brought him over the past 25 years. My hand was steady throughout. I want to note that. Not because steadiness is a virtue exactly, but because the last time I had signed important documents at a table, my hand had been steady too. The night I signed the partition agreement in the kitchen of my own house because I believed I was protecting my family. That steadiness had cost me 12 years. This steadiness felt different. This one was mine. The wire transfers went through yesterday afternoon, Samuel said, sliding the final page toward me. Melissa's short-term loan against the house equity paid in full. The payday advance she took out for your initial hospital deposit paid in full with interest. Her medical follow-up account cleared. He paused. She doesn't know yet. No, I said. She doesn't. How do you think she's going to take it? I picked up the pen. She's going to tell me I didn't have to do that, I said. And then she's going to cry. And then she's going to try to give some of it back. I signed my name on the final line. And I'm going to tell her that's not how this works. Samuel took the signed page and added it to the stack with the careful precision of a man who has handled important paperwork for a long time and has never once lost a document. "There's one more thing," he said. "Tom Grady called me this morning." I looked up. "He's been keeping an eye on the Civic since the night Melissa sold it to him," Samuel said. "He told me he had a feeling about it. Didn't put it on the lot. Kept it in the back." Samuel allowed himself a small smile, the kind that doesn't happen often on a man with his temperament. He said he didn't feel right selling it to someone else. Said if you ever got back on your feet, he figured you'd want to know where it was. Something moved through my chest that was warm and specific and did not have a clean name. "How much does he want for it?" I said. He said whatever you paid him for it originally is fine. Said the extra $300 he put in that night wasn't a loan. I thought about a gravel lot at midnight. A man who answered his phone when a 28-year-old woman called him at 11 o'clock on a Saturday and asked him to open his business so she could sell him her car to keep her father alive. A man who had given her more than she asked for without being asked. "Tell Tom I'm buying it back at double what Melissa sold it for," I said. "And tell him thank you. Tell him I mean that." Samuel nodded and made a note. "And the house on Brazos Street." The buyers agreed. 19% over their purchase price, Samuel said. They close on their new place in 3 weeks. The timing works out almost exactly. He looked at me over his reading glasses. "George, that house is going to be in the trust. Melissa won't just be getting her old house back. She'll own it outright. No mortgage, no loan, no payment due to anyone." I set the pen down on the desk. I thought about Melissa painting that house herself over a long weekend because she couldn't afford to hire anyone. I thought about her sending me photos from the front doorway in her paint-stained overalls, beaming like she had just won something, which she had. I thought about her selling it 3 weeks later without a word of complaint to keep me on an operating table. "Good," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "That's good." The 30 days had passed. The way the months after a long drought pass. When the rain finally comes, everything moved. Everything changed, and the world rearranged itself so completely that it became difficult to remember exactly what it had looked like before. Samuel handled every piece of it with the quiet efficiency of a man in his element. I signed what needed signing, answered what needed answering, and stayed out of the way of the process the way a man should when he has put the right person in charge of it. Melissa knew none of it. Every morning for those 30 days, she woke at 5:30 and followed the schedule on the refrigerator. Bus 47 transfer at Westheimer School by 7:45. Every evening she came home in her school clothes, smelling like dry erase markers and cafeteria food. Checked my leg, heated up dinner, sat with me while I did my physical therapy exercises on the living room floor. She was tired, I could see that. The bus commute added nearly 2 hours to her day, and teaching 4th grade is not a profession that has much give in it, even under the best circumstances. She never said a word about it. Not once. Not a sigh, not a glance at the empty hook by the door. Not a single moment of visible self-pity from a woman who had sold everything she owned and was riding public transportation for 2 hours a day to get to a job that paid her $40,000 a year because her father needed somewhere to heal. I watched her every evening, and I thought about the list in the drawer. The gold necklace, the grandmother's watch, the things she had been prepared to sell next. And I thought about Tom Grady keeping the Civic in the back of his lot because he had a feeling. And I thought about Samuel's voice saying, "The trust is untouchable, every piece of it," and something in me settled deeper and more permanently than it had in a very long time. I was sitting on the pull-out couch 11 days after the closing, working through my physical therapy exercises and watching Melissa grade papers at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed with a text from Samuel. It read, "Richard found the deed transfer in the Fort Bend County Public Records System. He called my office 3 times this afternoon. I did not return the calls. Thought you should know. Be ready." I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the cushion beside me. I went back to my exercises. Melissa looked up from her papers. "Everything okay?" I looked at my daughter, her reading glasses on the end of her nose, a red pen in her hand, a stack of math tests beside her coffee cup, living in a 1-bedroom apartment and riding a bus 2 hours a day and not complaining about any of it. "Everything's fine, baby," I said. "Just Samuel checking in." She nodded and went back to her papers, and I went back to my exercises. And the apartment was warm and ordinary around us, and I thought, she doesn't know yet. She doesn't know about the trust or the house or the car or any of it. And they're going to come Richard and Caroline because that's who they are. And they're going to come loud, and they're going to come angry, and they're going to come convinced that they are owed something. And when they do, I am going to be ready. I was ready the next morning when it happened. But they did not come in the morning. They came at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, while the Texas sun was still high and brutal, and they did not knock. They pounded. The pounding came again before I could get to the door. 3 heavy blows, the kind that aren't asking permission. I was halfway down the hallway on my crutches, moving as fast as I could manage, which was not very fast, and the sound of it hit me somewhere in the stomach, not from fear, but from recognition. I knew that knock. I had been waiting for it. I opened the door. Richard stood in the hallway in a dress shirt that had been pressed this morning and was not pressed anymore, the collar open, a sheen of sweat on his forehead that had nothing to do with the heat. His eyes were red at the corners in the specific way of a man who has not slept properly in several days and has been running on anger and caffeine to compensate. Behind him, Caroline stood with her arms folded across her chest and her chin lifted, but the composure she was projecting cost her something. I could see it in the tightness around her mouth, the way her knuckles had gone pale against her own forearms. Neither of them asked how my leg was healing. Not one word about the surgery, the recovery, the crutches I was standing on. They looked at me the way people look at a problem they have come to solve. "You sold the farms," Richard said. Not a question. "I did," I said. He pushed past me into the apartment. Caroline followed. I turned and made my way back down the hallway after them, taking my time because I was done moving fast for people who had never moved at all for me. Richard was in the kitchen, turning to face me as I came through the doorway, his jaw working the way it did when he was trying to decide which version of what he wanted to say to lead with. He settled on volume. "You had $18.7 million, and you didn't call me." His voice filled the apartment and bounced off the walls. "Your own son, Dad. You didn't make one phone call. The last time I called you," I said, keeping my voice level and easy, "you told me to use a wheelchair and went back to your scotch." I looked at him steadily. "So no, I didn't call you." Caroline stepped forward, her voice clipped and controlled. "George, that money belongs to this family. I was married to you for 30 years. I stood by you through all of it. You stood by me," I said, "right up until the moment you decided there was nothing left to stand by. Then you moved out, canceled my insurance, and drained our medical savings account to fund a life with a man who was running a fraud operation." I paused. "That's not standing by someone, Caroline. That's waiting for a better option." Her mouth opened. Whatever she had planned to say did not come out. Richard stepped in, his voice dropping to something harder and more deliberate. "My lawyers are prepared to file a motion to freeze every account connected to that sale. You hid marital assets. That's fraud, Dad. That's a real legal problem. It would be, I said, if those farms were marital assets. They're not. They've been my sole separate property under a notarized partition agreement since 3 years ago. I looked at him calmly. You drafted it, Richard. You witnessed it. You told your mother it was the smart move. A beat. It was. Just not in the direction you were planning. Richard's face did something complicated that moved through confusion and landed on fury. The front door opened. Melissa walked in, still wearing her school clothes, her bag over one shoulder, a paper coffee cup in her hand. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and took in the scene in front of her, her brother, her mother, her father, with the fast, assessing calm of a woman who has learned to read a room quickly. She set her coffee cup on the counter. She did not move toward anyone. "What's going on?" she said. Her voice was quiet. Richard turned to her. "Did you know about this? About the farms? About the money?" Melissa looked at him. Then she looked at me. I shook my head just slightly. "No," she said. "I didn't know." Richard turned back to me, his voice rising again. "How much, Dad? I want to hear you say it." I looked at my daughter first. Her eyes met mine, and what I saw in them was not excitement, not calculation, not the bright hunger of someone who has just learned they are about to receive something. What I saw was something quieter and more complicated than that. A kind of stillness that said, whatever this is, I am standing here, and I am not going anywhere. "After all debts, taxes, and costs," I said, $18.7 million. Caroline made a sound that was not quite a word. Melissa pressed her lips together and looked at the floor for one long moment. When she looked back up at me, her eyes were bright and wet at the edges, but her voice when she spoke was completely steady. "Dad," she said. "I know," I said. "We'll talk." Richard slammed his hand down on Melissa's kitchen table, the same table where she had set an envelope of cash to save my life 6 weeks ago, and the sound of it cracked through the apartment like something breaking. I looked at that table, then I looked at my son. "Sit down," I said quietly, "or get out. Right now, those are the only 2 options available to you." I reached into the drawer beside the refrigerator and took out 3 folders. I set them on the table between us. "You want to talk about lawyers?" I said. "Let's talk." Before I show you exactly what George pulled out of that drawer and 3 documents that left Richard and Caroline without a single word left to say, comment justice below so I know you're still here. This next part. You've been waiting for it since the beginning. One small note: this story weaves in fictional elements for storytelling and life lessons. If that's not what you're here for, this is a good place to step away. I opened the first folder and slid it across the table toward Caroline. "You remember this?" I said. She looked down. I watched her eyes move across the first paragraph, and I watched her face change, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow, terrible way that a face changes when the mind is catching up to something it already knows and has been hoping would stay buried. 3 years ago, I said, you were afraid my debt would take the house. Richard told you this was the smart move. He sat across from you at your own kitchen table, and he told you that you needed to protect yourself. I tapped the page. So you did. You had a lawyer draw this up. You took the house and your accounts as your sole separate property, and you made me take those 3 farms, the debt, the taxes, the liens, all of it, as my sole separate property. I looked at her steadily. And right here on page 4, you agreed to waive any and all future claims to whatever those farms produced, regardless of cause, regardless of circumstance, regardless of any change in their financial status. Caroline's lips moved, but nothing came out. I turned to Richard and pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the page. "You witnessed it," I said. "You wrote your name right there. You told your mother it was the smart play." I paused. "It was. Just not for the reason you thought." Richard's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to his own signature. "That agreement doesn't cover this situation," he said, but his voice had lost its earlier heat, replaced by something thinner. "My attorney will argue." "Your attorney can argue whatever he wants," I said. "He'll lose. Because the language is clear and the notary seal is on record, and you're the one who signed as witness." I closed the first folder. "You gave away your claim to those farms 3 years ago, Richard. You just didn't know they were worth something yet." I opened the second folder and set it in front of him. He looked down at Melissa's bank statement. The date was the morning after my surgery. The balance was $12.43. "Your sister had $12, I said. "The night before, she sold her car in a gravel parking lot at 11 o'clock so I could get on an operating table. You were at Perry's Steakhouse ordering another bottle of wine to celebrate a contract you hadn't read carefully enough." I let that sit for a moment. "While you were doing that, she was signing away the only car she owned to a man she trusted for less than it was worth because there was no other option." I looked at my son. $12, Richard. That's what your sister had left after she saved my life." Richard's face had gone pale. He stared at the bank statement and did not say anything, and for the first time since he had walked through that door, he looked less like a man pressing an advantage and more like a man beginning to understand the dimensions of something he cannot take back. I reached into the third folder. I did not say anything. I simply placed the document on the table in front of Caroline and stepped back. It was a single page. A record obtained by Samuel from the insurance company's inquiry log, documenting a call made 6 weeks before my surgery. A co-beneficiary on the life insurance policy had contacted the claims department to ask about the disbursement process in the event that the insured did not survive a surgical procedure. Caroline looked at it. The color drained out of her face so completely and so quickly that I actually watched it happen like water leaving a glass. Her hands, which had been folded on the table, came apart and pressed flat against the surface, and her breath went shallow and audible, and she made a sound low in her throat that was not a word. Richard looked at the document. Then he looked at his mother, and something happened in his face that I had not seen in a very long time. Something young and unguarded, and genuinely shaken, like a man who has just been shown a version of the world he did not know existed and cannot immediately decide what to do with it. His mouth opened, closed. Melissa was standing in the kitchen doorway, with both hands pressed flat against the doorframe, her knuckles white, her eyes moving between the document on the table and our mother's face. Nobody performed anything in that moment. Nobody reached for a next move or calculated an angle. The room was just 4 people, and the truth was large enough to fill every corner of it. "I didn't hide anything from anyone," I said, and my voice came out quiet and final. "I found out about those farms sitting on your sister's pull-out couch, recovering from surgery she paid for. It took 30 days to close the sale. The trust was finalized last week." I looked at Caroline, then at Richard. I didn't keep this quiet to be cruel. I kept it quiet because I needed time to make sure the money went to the only person in this room who actually earned it. I closed the third folder. "Now," I said, "we're done here." Richard tried one more time. He always did. That was the thing about my son. He did not know how to leave a room without having the last word. And he had been that way since he was 9 years old, arguing about bedtime. "I'm still your son," he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter than anything he'd used since walking through the door, something that almost sounded like the boy I used to know. Almost. I looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," I said, "you are. And the night I needed $3,200 to keep the use of my foot, my son told me to get a wheelchair and went back to his wine." I held his gaze. "My daughter sold her car. So I made my choice the same way you made yours, clearly, and without apology." Richard's mouth tightened. He looked at Melissa, who was still in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded, now her chin up, her eyes dry. Caroline made one last attempt, her voice gone soft, in a way that might have worked on me 20 years ago. "George, 30 years. Whatever happened with Victor, I was still your wife for 30 years. "You were," I said. "And when I was on a warehouse floor with a bone pressing on a nerve, you were on a phone asking an insurance company what you'd collect if I didn't make it off the table." I looked at her quietly. "That's not 30 years of marriage, Caroline. That's 30 years ending." She flinched. It was small and fast, and she covered it immediately, but I saw it. "The trust is finalized," I said. "Irrevocable. Melissa's house on Brazos Street is in it, paid outright, no mortgage. Her car is outside the Civic she sold, bought back. The medical debt she took on for me is gone. There's a scholarship fund for the families of the men who used to work my farms." I paused. "You both signed yourselves out of this 3 years ago, with your own pen, before your own notary. I didn't do that to you. You did it to protect yourselves from me." I gestured toward the door. "Get out of my daughter's house." They left. No slammed door. No parting shot. Just two people walking out of an apartment, and the soft final click of a latch catching. Melissa and I stood in the kitchen in the quiet that followed. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, something layered, something that was still processing. "Dad," she said finally, "you didn't have to give me all of it." "Yes," I said, I did. I walked to the hook beside the front door slowly, carefully, but without the crutches. The key to her Civic was hanging there on the same brass hook that had been empty for 6 weeks. I touched it once, just with my fingertips. When I was on that warehouse floor, I said yours was the only face I thought about. Not the land, not the money. Just you. I turned to look at her. That's how I knew what to do with all of it. Melissa pressed her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, twice, and then she crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put her arms around me, and I held my daughter in that small apartment while she finally let herself cry. I did not tell her to stop. I just held on. Somewhere across town that night, my son sat down with a stack of contracts that had Victor Hale's promises at the top and Richard's own signature guaranteeing every dollar at the bottom. And there was no one left in his corner to call. Funny how that works. Funny how it always works. I have been sitting with this story for a long time now, turning it over the way you turn over something heavy to see if it looks different from the other sin. It doesn't. It looks exactly the same. Here is what I know: Grandpa stories like mine don't make the news. They happen at kitchen tables and hospital beds and gravel parking lots at midnight, and nobody writes them down unless someone decides they are worth remembering. This one is worth remembering. If I could say one thing to anyone walking a road that looks like mine, don't wait for the people who have already left to come back. They left for a reason. God showed me that the hard way, and I am grateful He did, even if the lesson cost 12 years. The truth is, family story doesn't always mean the people who share your name. Sometimes it means the person who sells her car without finishing her sentence. Sometimes loyalty looks like a bus schedule on a refrigerator and a drawer full of things someone was willing to give up for you. My opinion, for whatever it is, worth grandpa stories are really family story about who shows up. That's all they have ever been. If something in this grandpa stories landed somewhere real for you, leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and life lessons. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what feeds your soul.